Mr. President, earlier this week, a federal judge in Washington, D.C. outlawed the continued use of Title 42 pandemic-related authority for the expedited removal of aliens who enter our country illegally. The judge found that the policy should be updated because the COVID-19 pandemic has changed since 2020. I agree. The pandemic is over. But the border crisis is not over. In fact, it's worse than ever. That's why I've introduced legislation that provides a far stronger reason for invoking Title 42 authority. The deadly drug smuggling crisis at our southern border that's killing a record number of Americans. The Biden administration has dismantled our nation's most effective border security policies. When I led a group of Tennessee sheriffs and mayors to the border this past April, Border Patrol agents in Laredo told me that the migrant protection protocols, which are also known as MPP, or Remain in Mexico, were a painful illustration of the Biden administration's destruction of these border security tools. MPP required that migrants seeking asylum in the United States remain in Mexico until it's been determined whether they were actually entitled to asylum. The vast majority of those claiming asylum are not entitled to it. When MPP was implemented in 2019, the agents said it was like flipping a switch because people stopped coming when they learned they couldn't get in. Once the Biden administration halted this policy, illegal immigration catapulted to record numbers. In fiscal year 2021, more than 1.7 million known illegal border crossings occurred, a new record. That record was short-lived, however, because in fiscal year 2022 that just ended in September, nearly 2.4 million illegal crossings were documented, exceeding the 2021 record by 37%. And that doesn't take into account the gotaways. Last month set a new record for October with more than 230,000 illegal aliens. These figures are just the crossings that the agents see and document. When I traveled to the border in April, Border Patrol agents told me that Title 42 was the last tool that they had to at least partially stem the tide of illegal border crossings. If we allow a D.C. judge to remove Title 42 authority, our Border Patrol agents will have no tool to stem the massive increase in illegal immigration that is certain to follow. And that's why, given this recent court ruling, passing my legislation today is imperative. To illustrate, Border Patrol currently has capacity to process a maximum of roughly 5,000 illegal migrants per day. Right now, they're already overwhelmed, processing nearly 8,000 per day. Predictions from agents and former immigration judges are that without Title 42 authority, this number would likely double to between 15,000 and 18,000 per day. This would overwhelm processing capability, and the border would effectively cease to exist. Such a surrender of American security and sovereignty is intolerable. The Department of Homeland Security itself said in response to this week's court decision, quote, "We will prepare for an orderly transition to new policies at the border. We know that smugglers will lie to try to take advantage of vulnerable migrants, putting lives at risk." Yes, it's true that we need policies to replace Title 42, and it's true that smugglers will use this court ruling to entice thousands more migrants per day to cross the border illegally, which will risk lives and will magnify the humanitarian crisis at our southern border in a variety of ways. If swift removal under Title 42 is a possibility, would-be border crossers might decide not to embark. But without Title 42, there's nothing left to dissuade them. Further, without Title 42, the drug cartels send migrants across the strategic points to bog down Border Patrol agents with paperwork processing. And the paperwork processing time frame is 5 times longer without Title 42. Do the math. Removing Title 42 will collapse what is left of our Border Patrol's capacity. And with Border Patrol bogged down further, the cartels will use the resulting enforcement gaps to move their fentanyl, which they produce with the help of the Chinese Communist Party, across our southern border. We cannot allow more enforcement gaps for deadly drug smuggling. That's why I've introduced legislation to add drug smuggling as an additional basis for Title 42 authority. It's called the Stop Fentanyl Border Crossings Act. Overdoses have become an epidemic in America. This legislation would allow the Secretary of Health and Human Services to use Title 42 to combat substantial, dangerous drug trafficking across the border. This bill would give Border Patrol a necessary tool to focus on stopping drug traffickers. According to the CDC, drug overdose deaths reached another record high last year. Nearly 107,000 Americans died, many from fentanyl and other synthetic opioids coming across this southern border. We desperately need Title 42 to aid in the fight against this drug epidemic. Without this authority, the record-breaking border crisis and the deadly drug overdose crisis that it fuels will become unimaginably worse. Therefore, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions be discharged from further consideration of S. 3959 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration. Further, that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection? Senator from Washington.
Mr. President, reserving the right to object, let me just say at the start, Title 42 is a public health tool, and how it is used should be guided by public health experts, looking at data, looking at science, not politicians looking to score political points. And let's be clear, drug trafficking is a serious problem, and one we do have law enforcement agencies responsible for. We should leave that work to them and support their efforts. But instead of proposing real legislative solutions to address drug trafficking based on what will keep people safe, Republicans want to use Title 42 now as a means to keep out anyone seeking asylum and create a political talking point. And while I welcome the opportunity to work with my Republican colleague on serious, bipartisan solutions to address drug trafficking, I object to this at this time.
Ms. Hurd.
Mr. President.
Senator from Tennessee.
Mr. President, my Democratic colleague is objecting to legislation that simply gives the Secretary of Health and Human Services the authority to limit border crossings when necessary to combat substantial, dangerous, illicit drug smuggling. It doesn't provide authority to stop all asylum claims. It only applies where substantial illicit drug smuggling is endangering public health. More than 100,000 Americans are dying annually of drug overdoses, many of which result from drug smuggling at our southern border. The legislation isn't a mandate. It's a tool to help save American lives whenever that's possible. Everyone acknowledges that an already record-breaking crisis will get far worse without Title 42. American lives and communities hang in the balance. Yet my colleagues across the aisle are categorically opposed to a commensurate common-sense policy to address this glaring problem. It begs the question, what do Democrats propose that we do in response to this Title 42 ruling? Refuse to deal with the problem? Hope that this crisis won't spiral further out of control? These are not acceptable answers. More broadly, is any volume of illegal immigration or drug overdose deaths adequate to get this administration to secure the border? How much longer will we allow our broken border policies to be manipulated by a criminal alliance between the Chinese communists and the billion-dollar Mexican drug cartels that are shipping huge quantities of deadly illegal drugs into the United States across our southern border? Mr. President, I yield the floor.